It just hurts so bad that someone would do something so heartbreaking, especially someone she just loved so much. And I just want to make sure that nobody ever forgets Zavea Marie. She was such a happy baby. And
Two shocking crimes. Two families torn apart. In the first case, a father took his daughter's life while on Facetime with his wife, all because she refused to share her phone's password. What could drive someone to such an unthinkable act? And in the second case, a quiet Sunday morning turned into horror when a stepson walked into a church and opened fire on his own stepmother, right in the middle of the service. Investigators soon discovered a disturbing motive rooted in anger and greed. These are not just murders. They are chilling reminders of how rage and control can destroy the very people we are supposed to love the most. Stay tuned as we uncover the twisted motives, the investigations, and the final verdicts behind these heartbreaking cases. The heartbreaking story of Zavea Flanagan shook Harris County, Texas, in March 2023. Just 2 years old, Zavea was the innocent victim of a horrifying act committed by the person who should have protected her most, her own father. On the morning of March 20th, DeAndre Flanagan picked up his daughter from daycare without permission. He then drove straight to a Walmart where Zavea's mother, Kirsten Watson, worked. What happened next would spiral into a nightmare. Flanagan violently assaulted Kirsten inside the store, stole her phone, and fled the scene, setting off a 30-mile police chase with his unrestrained toddler in the car. But the most chilling part came during that chase. Flanagan FaceTimed Kirsten and her father, forcing them to witness an unthinkable horror. He choked and beat Zavea on camera, demanding Kirsten give him her phone password. When she refused, the violence escalated. The pursuit ended when Flanagan crashed near St. Dunstan's Episcopal Church, triggering a tense 20-minute standoff with SWAT. Despite Kirsten's pleas, who could still see the horror unfolding via FaceTime, officers delayed entry. When they finally intervened, Zavea was found unresponsive. She was rushed to the hospital but didn't survive. The autopsy confirmed she died from strangulation and blunt force trauma. Flanagan's trial painted a disturbing picture. His violent past, including prior arrests and Kirsten's repeated reports of threats, were brought to light. Yet no effective action had been taken to protect her or Zavea. During court proceedings, Flanagan lashed out again, attacking a news photographer while being escorted in leg shackles but without handcuffs. Deputies immediately took him down, a moment captured on camera. The jury took less than 2 hours to reach a verdict: guilty of capital murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This case is more than a crime, it's a painful reminder of the systemic failures surrounding domestic violence. Kirsten did everything she could to raise alarms, but her warnings went unheard. Now she and her family are left with unimaginable grief, and a mission to demand change so that no other child has to suffer the way Zavea did. This is the heartbreaking story of DeAndre Flanagan, a man whose rage and desperation pushed him beyond the edge and turned him into a killer. He was the father of 2-year-old Zavea Flanagan, a bright, innocent little girl who loved him without question. But behind the scenes, his relationship with Zavea's mother, Kirsten Watson, was turbulent, filled with anger, threats, and abuse. Then came a tragic day in March 2023 when DeAndre took Zavea from her daycare without permission, triggering a horrific chain of events. What could cause a father to carry out such an unspeakable act? And how did this nightmare come to pass, even after signs and warnings suggested something tragic was just around the corner? This story takes us to Houston, Texas, a city pulsing with life, culture, and opportunity. It's one of the largest and most diverse cities in the United States, known for its sprawling urban landscape and rich history. But beneath its energetic surface lie complex social issues that many communities quietly endure. And it's within this backdrop that the heartbreaking story of DeAndre Flanagan unfolds. DeAndre was born in 1998 and raised in Texas with his parents and siblings. While not much is publicly known about his early family life, reports suggest it was far from stable, an upbringing that may have played a significant role in shaping his later behavior. In 2021, he became a father to a baby girl named Zavea, or Z, Flanagan. He shared custody with her mother, Kirsten Watson, but their relationship was riddled with conflict and dysfunction. As an adult, DeAndre struggled to find his footing. He held a series of short-term jobs that never brought him real financial security or fulfillment. More troublingly, those close to him described him as volatile and emotionally unpredictable. He often exhibited manipulative behavior and had a hard time controlling his temper. These issues extended beyond his personal relationships. He had a criminal history dating back to 2017, including charges for evading arrest, assaulting a family member, and criminal mischief. It painted a grim portrait of a man spiraling under the weight of unresolved anger. Despite the chaos, there were reports that he had moments of charm and charisma. But these glimpses of positivity were often eclipsed by his darker side. His relationship with Z seemed loving on the surface, yet his actions consistently put both her and Kirsten in danger. Family members would later speak out, describing him as evil, a man consumed by his own demons. Then came the day that would shatter everything. March 20, 2023. The events of that morning in Harris County, Texas, were nothing short of a nightmare. Around 10:15 a.m., DeAndre picked up little Z from her daycare. No one suspected what would follow. He then drove to a Walmart where Kirsten was working. There, he confronted her and demanded access to her phone. When she refused to give him the password, he physically assaulted her, punching her in the face several times. After the attack, he fled the store with Z in his car and Kirsten's phone in hand. What followed was a terrifying 45-minute high-speed chase across 30 miles of Harris County. Witnesses watched in horror as DeAndre weaved dangerously through traffic, his daughter unrestrained in the back seat, tossed around with every reckless turn. But the most disturbing part wasn't just the chase, it was what happened during it. While evading police, DeAndre FaceTimed Kirsten and her father, Curtis Watson. What they saw through the screen was horrifying. DeAndre began strangling and beating Z right in front of them, enraged that Kirsten still wouldn't give him the phone password. They pleaded with him, begged him to stop, but he didn't. Instead, he uttered chilling words that would be forever etched in their memories. "This is what you made me do." Curtis Watson later testified about the heartbreak of witnessing his granddaughter's lifeless body on that screen, powerless to intervene. It's a moment that continues to haunt him.
But then he showed me the lifeless corpse of my granddaughter. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, and to have to go through that type of anguish and pain.
The chase ended near St. Dunstan's Episcopal Church, where DeAndre crashed the vehicle in an open field. SWAT teams quickly surrounded him. For nearly 20 minutes, a tense standoff ensued, with DeAndre still in the car and Z critically injured beside him. Despite Kirsten's desperate pleas, still watching everything through the FaceTime call, officers held back, citing safety protocols. That delay has since sparked intense criticism. When law enforcement finally moved in, they pulled Z from the car and rushed her to a nearby Level 1 trauma center. But it was too late. She was pronounced dead shortly after. DeAndre Flanagan was arrested at the scene and initially charged with felony murder, a charge that would later escalate as the investigation revealed the full extent of his brutality.
Now this testimony in the capital murder trial of DeAndre Flanagan happening now.
Yeah, prosecutors say he killed his 2-year-old daughter during a police chase last year while the child's mother watched in horror over the phone during a FaceTime call.
Now, Flanagan, of course, is now charged with murder. According to court records, he hit little Zavea with and against a blunt object and choked her as well, we've learned on Monday. The little girl's aunt just at a loss as to what the 2-year-old may have felt in her final moments.
Her face was just covered in blood. He hit her with something really hard. And then he called me on FaceTime, and he showed me that he choked her on FaceTime as I was on there. And I said, "Trey, that's your daughter. That is your daughter. Stop. That is your daughter. She loves you. I care about her. You care about her. Like, that is your daughter." And he told me, his exact words was, "You only love that man, so you did this to her."
DeAndre's horrific killing of his 2-year-old daughter could potentially lead to capital murder charges, depending on the final results of Zavia's autopsy report.
Today, a judge doubled the bond of a father accused in the death of his child during a police chase.
Yeah, prosecutors say murder charges against DeAndre Flanagan could be upgraded to capital murder depending on the results of the autopsy on his 2-year-old little girl.
DeAndre Flanagan, now facing capital murder charges, appeared in court wearing a yellow jumpsuit and handcuffs, just days after allegedly killing his 2-year-old daughter, Zavia. Family members and prosecutors say this tragedy could have been prevented. Zavia's mother, Kirsten Watson, had warned authorities about threats from Flanagan. The system, she says, failed her, and her daughter.
She loved to sing. She was a very happy baby. Like, she brought joy to every room. Everyone loved her so much. And it just hurt so bad that someone would do something so heartbreaking, especially someone she just loved so much. And I just want to make sure that nobody ever forgets Zavea Marie. Like, she was such a happy baby, and I just don't want her to be forgotten. Long live Zavea.
Now Flanagan is being held on a $2 million bond. The community is left grieving the loss of an innocent child, while serious questions are being raised about the missed warning signs and delayed police response.
The first time, 911, okay, we figure, okay, it's the first time. They figure it's not credible. The second time we call, oh, well, we know we really can't. What do you mean you can't? We want to foster a law, a bill, and foster it into law, because we know that you're the ones that write those laws.
Zavia's mother is left with unimaginable pain and a fight for justice. "I was just trying to move on and take care of my daughter," she said, "but I guess he didn't want that for us." Medical examiners later confirmed what many feared. Zavia Flanagan died from a combination of strangulation and blunt force trauma, all inflicted during that horrifying police chase.
I give her baths, we lay together, we sleep together, and now I won't be able to do any of that anymore. I'm just trying to wrap my head around why. How could you do this to your little girl? I know in her mind, she probably was just wondering, what did I do? What are you doing this to me for? I love you, why are you hurting me? All I was trying to do was provide for my daughter and move on, and I guess he just didn't want that. Didn't want that for us. So.
As investigators dug deeper into the case, more evidence surfaced, including chilling screenshots taken from the Facetime call DeAndre had made during the incident. That footage, which captured the violent assault, left no room for doubt. With the evidence mounting, the charges against DeAndre Flanagan were elevated to capital murder. His trial began in early 2025, and on January 13, 2025, a jury found him guilty of capital murder. The verdict was clear and the sentence was final: life in prison without the possibility of parole. During the trial, prosecutors laid out DeAndre's deeply troubling history. They spoke of prior convictions, charges for assault and criminal mischief that painted a picture of a man with a long pattern of violence and instability. But what struck the public hardest was the revelation that Kirsten Watson, Zavia's mother, had repeatedly warned authorities about DeAndre's threats. Despite her pleas, no meaningful action was taken. No protective measures were put in place. And that failure has drawn heavy criticism ever since. In response to the public outcry, the Harris County Sheriff's Office launched an internal investigation. Their goal: to determine whether law enforcement followed proper procedures during the chase and the standoff, and whether lives were put in greater danger because of missteps or delays. Critics, including Kirsten herself, are demanding answers. Why didn't police intervene sooner when the threat to Zavia was so obvious? Why was there hesitation, especially when she was clearly being harmed in real time on a live FaceTime call? In the aftermath of the tragedy, the community rallied behind Zavia's grieving family. Supporters raised funds through a GoFundMe campaign to help with funeral expenses. Zavia's aunt, Casey Watson, shared her heartbreak with the world, describing her niece as a joyful, loving child who was full of life, and who didn't deserve such a horrific fate.
But then he showed me the lifeless corpse of my granddaughter. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, and to have to go through that type of anguish and pain.
I was thinking, why? Dad, what did I do? And she didn't do anything. She didn't do anything but love him and be a joy to the world. And he's just an evil person.
Kirsten Watson, forever changed by what happened, has vowed to fight for change. She now advocates for stronger protections for victims of domestic violence, especially when children are involved. Her warnings were ignored, and that betrayal by the very system meant to protect her and her daughter has left scars that may never heal. Curtis Watson will never forget what he saw on that FaceTime call. But then, he showed me the lifeless corpse of my granddaughter, Curtis said in court, his voice heavy with pain. I wouldn't wish that on anyone, to have to go through that type of anguish and pain. Then, with quiet strength, he turned to address the man responsible, DeAndre Flanagan. "You may have taken her last breath," he said, "but you cannot kill her spirit, her memory, or her name." It was a powerful moment. A grieving grandfather standing in the courtroom, refusing to let his granddaughter's legacy be erased by the brutality of one man. But behind the emotion was another devastating truth. This tragedy might have been prevented. Just one day before Zavia's murder, on March 19th, Kirsten Watson, Zavia's mother, had reported Diantre's threats to the police. She had text messages showing he threatened to harm their daughter. But when officers responded, something critical went wrong. According to the Harris County Sheriff's Office, the deputy on the scene consulted with the district attorney's office, but they said there wasn't enough evidence to press charges. A welfare check was attempted to find Flanagan, but those efforts came up empty. No arrest. No follow-up. No protection. Even more concerning, the DA's office later stated they were never formally updated by that deputy. The case file simply noted that more investigation was needed. No charges. No intervention. Just a delay, one that cost a little girl her life. Back in 2023, when reporters at Eyewitness News asked the sheriff's office why the DA wasn't properly informed about the March 19th threat, they received no response. Kirsten, still reeling from the loss of her only child, says it plainly. "They didn't believe me," she told reporters. "They thought I was just making this up, because he was the father." This wasn't just a failure of one person. It was a systemic breakdown. A moment when the people meant to protect fell silent, and a cry for help was ignored. And now the child is gone. What happened to Zavia Flanagan should never have happened. Her death wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was the devastating result of systemic failures. Repeated cries for help were overlooked. Clear red flags were missed. And despite mounting evidence of Diantre's dangerous behavior, there was no timely intervention. Stronger laws, better enforcement, and greater accountability could have made all the difference. Authorities must take reported threats seriously, investigate thoroughly, and act swiftly when children are at risk.
I give her baths, we lay together, we sleep together, and now I won't be able to do any of that anymore. I'm just trying to wrap my head around why. How could you do this to your little girl? I know in her mind, she probably was just wondering, what did I do? What are you doing this to me for? I love you, why are you hurting me? All I was trying to do was provide for my daughter and move on, and I guess he just didn't want that. Didn't want that for us. So. Her face was just covered in blood. He hit her with something really hard. And then he called me on Facetime, and he showed me that he choked her on Facetime as I was on there. And I said, "Trey, that's your daughter. That is your daughter. Stop. That is your daughter. She loves you. I care about her. You care about her. That is your daughter." And he told me, his exact words was, "You only love that man, so you did this to her."
Zavia's death is a heartbreaking reminder of what's at stake when they don't. The impact of her loss will echo forever. For her mother, Kirsten, who was forced to witness her child's final moments, the pain is unimaginable. Her grief is mixed with frustration, rage, and the heavy burden of what might have been prevented. To Zavia's family, our hearts are with you. May you continue to find strength in your memories of her, and may justice bring you a small measure of peace. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Truth in Crimes. We appreciate you taking the time to reflect on such a difficult and important case. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Please share them in the comments because your voice matters. Our mission is to bring you accurate, well-researched, and emotionally compelling stories, all grounded in truth. Until next time, stay safe, take care of one another, and stay tuned for another gripping case coming soon.
In the early hours of January 31st, 2021, a peaceful Sunday morning turned into a nightmare. Inside the Agape Christian Fellowship Church in Falmouth, Jamaica, 51-year-old Andrea Logarwood sat quietly in prayer, unaware that death was sitting just a pew behind her. As the choir sang and the service live-streamed on Facebook, gunshots suddenly rang out. Chaos erupted. And when the smoke cleared, Andrea lay lifeless on the church floor, shot multiple times right in front of the congregation and the entire internet. But what came next was even more chilling. The police rushed to the scene, desperate for answers. And as they followed the trail of evidence, they uncovered a twisted betrayal that left the entire island stunned. The person accused of orchestrating the hit was Andrea's own stepson. But this wasn't just about murder, it was about inheritance, revenge, and a calculated plan that shattered a family forever. Is the life and death of Andrea Logarwood. This tragedy unfolded in Trelawney, a quiet parish nestled on Jamaica's northwestern coast. Known for its lush green hills, deep community roots, and relatively low crime rates, but in 2021, that peace would be shattered in one of the most unimaginable ways.
Many men are trying, but she needs to be alone and wine and dine because she's right, yeah. So divine, so divine. The way she moves, you are only.
Born on May 27, 1969, Andrea was more than just another statistic. From childhood, she was someone you noticed, bright, determined, and full of energy. She wasn't just chasing success, she was carving out a future with purpose and heart. Andrea was driven by faith and a powerful spirit. She knew what she wanted and she went after it with everything she had. Her drive led her to a remarkable career. She worked for over 20 years at the National Commercial Bank in Montego Bay, eventually rising to the role of regional credit card manager. Her co-workers described her as tireless, professional, and fiercely committed to excellence. Even her boss once said, Andrea didn't know how to do mediocre work. But she wasn't just respected, she was loved. Andrea had a reputation for being the life of the party, bringing laughter and light wherever she went. That light shone especially bright in her personal life. Andrea met and quietly fell in love with her first husband. Although they kept much of their life together private, one thing was clear: Andrea loved deeply. And from that chapter came her greatest joy, her son, Andre Williams. She poured her heart into raising him. He was her world, her nice clean pickney, as she affectionately called him. She prayed constantly for his well-being, always asking God to keep him safe and on the right path. Her love for Andre was unwavering, and her entire life seemed to orbit around raising him right. At 47, Andrea made a bold move, relocating from St. James to Trelawney to build a new, peaceful life for her small family. There, she joined the Agape Christian Fellowship Church, where she quickly became known for her energy, warmth, and community spirit. Church Secretary Don Henry described her as a real go-getter, always uplifting others and adding a spark to everything she touched. But after years of pouring herself into work, family, and faith, Andrea began to feel the quiet ache of loneliness. She longed for love again. This time, she wasn't willing to settle. She even wrote out a list of everything she hoped for in a man: clear, intentional, and hopeful. Still, doubt began to set in. Maybe love had passed her by. Then, just when she started to let go of that dream, life surprised her. She met Jeffrey Garwood, a tour bus operator with a kind soul and gentle demeanor. He was 8 years older, but from the moment they connected, Andrea felt something real. They shared mutual respect, faith, and values. Like Andrea, Jeffrey had a deep relationship with God. And just like her, he knew the struggles of raising children. He was a devoted father to 4 young boys. Andrea saw his love for his sons, his patience, his warmth, and she fell in love with all of it. Everything was perfect. Maybe a little too perfect. And Andrea couldn't shake the feeling. Something about how quickly it was all happening made her uneasy. She worried about the speed of the relationship, the intensity. But no matter how hard she tried to fight it, their love felt real, genuine. And their devotion to each other? Undeniable. Jeffrey was everything she had ever prayed for. And because he seemed like a walking, breathing answer to that long list she once made, Andrea gave in. She let herself fall. Soon her life took on a new shape. Her family grew, not just in numbers but in meaning. In 2017, Andrea and Jeffrey stood before God, their friends, and their families, and said, "I do." A new chapter had officially begun. The two became husband and wife, promising to build a life together, one rooted in love, faith, and unity. They moved into their dream home, a beautiful property in Stonebrook Manor, a prestigious gated community in Florence Hall, near Falmouth, Trelawney Parish. From the outside, everything looked idyllic. But inside, Andrea was quietly battling a storm. Becoming part of a blended family wasn't as seamless as she had hoped. Though she was thrilled to finally have a complete home and looked forward to bonding with Jeffrey's 4 sons, reality hit hard. His children were already grown, and they knew very clearly that Andrea wasn't their mother. No matter how hard she tried, there was always a distance, a silent barrier that couldn't be crossed so easily. But Jeffrey stood firmly by her side. His love never wavered, and that gave Andrea the strength to keep trying, to extend her hand, to soften the space between her and the boys, and to build a sense of unity she deeply longed for. And just when it seemed like she was finally finding her rhythm, the ground beneath her gave way. In July 2020, Jeffrey kissed his wife goodbye and headed out for what should have been a routine day on the road. Just another shift, nothing out of the ordinary. But hours later, Andrea got the call that would shatter her world. Jeffrey had been killed in a motor vehicle crash in St. James. The accident was no random tragedy. According to reports, the vehicle that struck him was a getaway car, filled with men fleeing the police at high speed. In an instant, the man who had brought Andrea hope, healing, and companionship was gone. She was devastated, heartbroken, and she had no idea that this violent, unexpected loss was more than just a cruel twist of fate. It was a warning.
You're hiding away, you're locking away yourself. You don't want to talk to people. I am not there.
Right.
You understand? So I show up, I make sure that I go to church still. And that is another thing, because Jeffrey and I went to church together and we sat beside each other. But when COVID came, he started to sit behind me because beside me was too far. So he sit behind me. And so most Sundays when I go to church, I would like to call it I'm a hot mess. Because when I look to my left, there's no Jeffrey. When I look behind me, there's no Jeffrey. So these are the little things that sometimes causes me to have a meltdown. But guess what? I don't run away from it.
That is important.
I don't run away from it.
A chilling foreshadowing of the horror that would soon come for her too. After Jeffrey's sudden and heartbreaking passing, another storm was quietly brewing, one Andrea never saw coming. When the will was read, it revealed that a significant portion of Jeffrey's property, including their home, had been left to Andrea. He had also made provisions for some of his sons. It was a final act of love, a gesture of protection from beyond the grave. But that gesture would ignite a fire, because not everyone was pleased with what Jeffrey had decided, and their outrage wasn't quiet. It wasn't calm. It was loud, bitter, and vicious, and very quickly it became dangerous. Almost immediately after Jeffrey's death, Andrea began receiving death threats, not from strangers but allegedly from some of Jeffrey's own relatives. They demanded she sell the house. They wanted the proceeds. They wanted control. And they didn't ask nicely. The threats escalated so fast. Andrea had to request police protection just to attend her husband's funeral. Think about that. A grieving widow needing armed security just to say goodbye. But even then, despite the danger, the betrayal, and the rising tension, Andrea stood her ground. She refused to back down. She refused to be bullied out of her own home. What she didn't know was that this battle was only getting darker and far more deadly. Andrea carried on with life the best she could. She kept her routine, went to work, caught up with friends, and every Sunday without fail she found peace in the same place she always had, her church. But that routine, so predictable, so steady, would make her an easy target. And on January 31, 2021, the conflict within the Logarwood family reached its breaking point. That morning, Andrea attended church like she always did. It was just another Sunday. The congregation gathered at Agape Christian Fellowship Church, a place that had always been a safe space for Andrea. To include everyone, the service was being live-streamed on Facebook, letting people near and far join in worship. The energy was calm, reflective, full of peace. But as the music played and the sermon began, someone slipped in unnoticed. He didn't look like he belonged. He was young, dressed oddly, wearing a cap and a handkerchief tied tightly around his face to mimic a mask. One elder noticed him. Just after 9 a.m., he watched the man walk in and quietly take a seat, right behind Andrea. The elder hesitated. Something felt off. The attire wasn't appropriate. But he decided to wait until the end of the service before saying anything. That one small pause, just a few more minutes of patience, would haunt him for the rest of his life. The service moved on. The worship swelled. People lifted their voices and hands to the heavens. And then, gunshots. In one swift, cold movement, the man stood up and opened fire, shooting Andrea multiple times in the upper body. The sanctuary erupted in panic. The Facebook livestream didn't capture the actual shooting, but it recorded the moment the peace shattered. The sound of bullets, the screaming, the chaos, the horror. Andrea collapsed right there in the middle of her church. A place of healing and hope turned into a crime scene. And what no one knew in that moment was that this wasn't random. It was planned, calculated, and connected to a web of betrayal that had been building ever since Jeffrey's death. The shooter bolted from the church, but his escape? It wasn't as clean as he had planned. As he sprinted outside, adrenaline pumping, an off-duty officer who had been attending the service drew his weapon. He fired a warning shot into the air, just enough to create panic and slow the suspect down. And it did startle him. For a split second, the gunman froze. But only for a moment. He quickly regained his composure, dashed to a waiting vehicle, a white Toyota Allion, and jumped inside. His accomplice hit the gas, and they disappeared into the streets. But in his frantic escape, the shooter left behind a critical mistake. He had dropped his phone. There was no time to go back for it, and that single piece of evidence would open a trail that would change everything. Inside the church, 51-year-old Andrea Logarwood lay on the floor, bleeding, lifeless. By the time help arrived, it was too late. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The sanctuary fell silent, except for the echoes of chaos and grief. The congregation, stunned and broken, could only begin to piece together what had just happened. But even as the police secured the scene, far from the horror inside Agape Church, something else was unfolding, and it would crack the case wide open. In the quiet streets of Rose Heights, patrol officers spotted a white Toyota Allion. The driver looked jittery, nervous, suspicious. Then, without warning, he jumped out of the car and ran. Instantly, the officers gave chase. When they finally caught up with him, they questioned him about his strange behavior. But what they didn't know was that they were staring straight into the face of someone connected to the murder. And he knew they didn't know. So, with a shaky story and a flimsy excuse, he talked his way out of it. They let him go. But that brief encounter would come back later and lock him in tighter than he ever imagined. As news of the church shooting spread through Jamaica, city to city, phone to phone, the pieces began falling into place. Patrol officers started to realize that the white Toyota they had stopped earlier looked suspiciously like the same one seen fleeing from the church. Still, in a country filled with similar vehicles, it wasn't enough. Until one tip changed everything. Amidst all the panic, a member of the congregation had recorded the license plate number as the vehicle sped away. That detail, small but powerful, supercharged the investigation. Now police had a dropped phone, eyewitness accounts, officer sightings, and a plate number. The manhunt exploded into motion. Using surveillance footage, witness testimony, and forensic data, authorities tracked down the vehicle's renter. It had been rented just 2 days before the murder by a man named Leon Hines. And in an effort to cover his tracks, Leon had reported the car stolen. Naturally, the police dug deeper. What they found was confusing. Leon Hines was just 23, a storekeeper at Cornwall Regional Hospital. He had no criminal record, no signs of violence. He was known to coworkers as quiet, hardworking, even kind. So why would a young, respectable man be involved in such a brutal, cold-blooded assassination? The answer: he wasn't acting alone. Leon hadn't pulled the trigger. He was the getaway driver, which meant the person who did fire the shots was still out there. But the case was about to break wide open. One of the patrol officers who had stopped Leon earlier remembered something odd. He had fled in such a rush, he might have ditched something. They retraced their steps, and not far from where they had stopped him, they found it. The second phone. hidden in the bushes, was a major break. That phone, once searched, tied directly back to Leon Hines, proving his connection to the crime, despite the bogus stolen car claim. With everything now lining up, officers launched a targeted operation. They coordinated with multiple units across Montego Bay and the surrounding areas. After days of surveillance and tip-offs, police tracked the suspects to a home in Kingston. They moved in. And finally, the arrests were made. Among those captured, Leon Hines, the storekeeper turned getaway driver, and the man who pulled the trigger, Dwight Prince Bingham, a construction worker. But they weren't alone. A third suspect was found inside, and his identity would shake the entire family to its core. It was Andrea's own stepson, 29-year-old Javan Garwood, also known as Janoy. He had grown increasingly bitter after being completely excluded from his father's will. His anger had festered. His resentment had boiled over. And that hatred drove him to orchestrate the cold-blooded murder of the woman his father had loved and trusted most, his stepmother, Andrea Logarwood. The arrests were just the beginning. The suspects were swiftly charged, each one individually. Leon Hines, the quiet storekeeper turned getaway driver, was hit with a string of serious charges: murder, illegal possession of a firearm, accessory before the fact, accessory after the fact, and conspiracy to murder. Javan Garwood, Andrea's own stepson, the man believed to have orchestrated the entire crime, was charged with murder and conspiracy to murder. And the shooter, Dwight Prince Bingham, was charged with murder and illegal possession of a firearm. Their court dates were set. Bail denied. Each of them was kept behind bars, isolated from the community they had rattled to its core. But even with the suspects locked away, the damage had already been done.
After I went down to West Kingston yesterday and met with the divisional head and also the divisional head for Kingston Central to get a better appreciation myself of what was happening and what are the possible outcomes of that killing. When they had that one, immediately there was a response in about 15 minutes where the gangs killed some people up in West Street. I visited both locations and had interacted with the citizens there. And immediately we put in a response to separate these criminal gangs using our other assets that are not assigned there, but we use them in a more fluid way to interrupt this sort of thing. So we're also after some very specific people. We have a good sense of who did the shooting, and I know the team down in Kingston West is after them with some targeted operations, and we should see that start to wind down.
Andrea Logarwood's death sent shockwaves through the nation, and those shockwaves were loud. The Falmouth community, once peaceful and tight-knit, was now shaken. Residents were horrified that something so brutal, so calculated, could unfold inside a church, a place of worship, of peace, of safety. The outrage didn't stop there. Criticism erupted across Jamaica. The public condemned the government, demanding answers for the rapid spike in violence that had consumed the country in recent months. In just one weekend, dozens had been murdered. Now, even Sunday morning services weren't safe. But while the nation mourned, inside the Logarwood household, the pain was even deeper, more personal, more complicated. Andrea's only son, Andre Williams, found himself in a devastating place, alone in his grief, with his mother gone, and no one around him who could truly understand what he was going through. He had lost not just his parent, but the one person who had stood beside him through everything. And now, the people responsible were the very ones who had once called her family. The Garwood family, too, was split. Some were in disbelief. Others were frozen in shame and sorrow, struggling to comprehend how one of their own, Javan, could have been involved in such a calculated and unforgivable act. But not everyone shared that remorse. Soon, voice notes began to leak across social media. Messages from people claiming to be relatives. And the words they used? They painted Andrea as a wicked woman. Manipulative, a villain. The audio spread like wildfire. But just as quickly as it surfaced, others in the family spoke out, adamantly denying the accusations. They insisted that those claims were false, and that Andrea was nothing like what was being said. To those who truly knew her, Andrea Logarwood wasn't wicked. She was kind, loving, resilient, strong in her faith. A woman who worked hard, loved deeply, and simply wanted peace. But in the end, peace is what she was denied. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, the police and prosecutors were working around the clock, fighting for justice. And as the case unfolded, one of the accused would crack. Leon Hines was the first to turn. He accepted a plea deal, and in doing so, betrayed the others. Leon pled guilty to illegal possession of a firearm and accessory after the fact to murder. In exchange, prosecutors dropped several of the more serious charges, including murder and conspiracy. But Leon didn't stop there. He took the stand and delivered a series of testimonies that would rattle the courtroom, especially one moment that made the judge and jury sit up straight. Leon testified that, in January 2021, he received a strange WhatsApp message from Dwight Bingham. Attached, a photo of a thick stack of $1,000 bills. Curious, Leon asked what it was about. Dwight responded, he had received $170,000 from Garwood for a piece of work. Now, in court, Leon claimed he thought Dwight meant construction work at Garwood's home in Rose Heights. But then, Dwight offered him a cut of that cash if Leon agreed to be the getaway driver. That revelation sent a shockwave through the courtroom. A possible payment trail. A direct tie to the alleged mastermind, Javan Garwood. But just as quickly, the momentum unraveled. Leon admitted something that changed everything. Dwight never actually said what the money was for. Nothing was written. No job description. No explicit message. And without that, it was all open to interpretation. No hard proof. If the case was going to stick, it would come down to Dwight, the man who pulled the trigger. Would he speak? Would he name Javan? At first, it looked like hope. Dwight Bingham agreed to testify against Javan. The prosecution was relieved. This could be it. This could secure the conviction. But then, during his next court appearance, everything fell apart. In a shocking turn, Dwight changed his mind. He refused to testify, refused to speak, refused to cooperate. For years, he remained silent. He told the court he had nothing to say to anybody. And with that silence, the link to Javan Garwood collapsed. Prosecutors were left with nothing. Still, Dwight faced justice for his own role in Andrea's murder. On January 25, 2023, he was sentenced to 42 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30. Leon Hines, having cooperated, received a reduced sentence on March 21, 2023, 6 years behind bars. But the most controversial verdict, Javan Garwood, the man accused of masterminding the entire murder plot. On July 13, 2025, Chief Justice Brian Sykes, the presiding judge, addressed the courtroom, and the words that followed would leave many stunned. Due to a lack of evidence, the judge directed the jury to return a verdict of not guilty. For over 2 years, prosecutors had hoped, begged, for Dwight to break his silence and turn on Javan, but it never happened. And without that testimony, the case was deemed too weak to stand. Javan's defense argued there was no direct link, no messages, no voice notes, no payment trail, just suspicion. And in the end, suspicion wasn't enough. The jury had no choice but to declare him not guilty on all counts. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. Andrea's son, Andre Williams, was shattered. He left the courthouse in disbelief, emotionally wrecked, eyes low, too devastated to speak. He waved the cameras away, choosing silence, choosing peace. He returned to his life, carrying the weight of a mother stolen and justice denied. To this day, the scars remain. Andrea's murder didn't just shake her family. It rocked an entire nation. The church eventually reopened its doors. The family began the slow, painful process of healing. And Andre, still quiet, still grieving, works every day to carry on his mother's legacy of kindness, faith, and love. May Andrea Logarwood's gentle soul rest in peace. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.